the right time on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app, presented by Progressive Insurance. Nick Friedel and Sarah Spain filling in for Bomani today, bringing you all the latest NBA news. We'll also get a little bit into the Cubs dust-up between Jake Arrieta and Miguel Montero. Also, some troubling news in our industry. I want to ask Nick's opinion on something. But let's get into a little bit more of what went down in New York today and what this means for the legacy of Phil Jackson. We're both Chicago-based people remembering Phil as one of the greatest sports coaches of all time, of any sport. And kind of an unceremonious or dramatic, I guess is the better word for it, exit from New York, because this has been a long time coming for most Knicks fans and most analysts, wondering how he's hanging on so long. And what's interesting about Phil Jackson is that, by all accounts, he didn't want the job in the first place. And then by the end of it, it felt as though he was almost actively trying to be fired. People believed he was sabotaging his own job in order to get out of the contract that he didn't want to finish. Do you believe that at all, Nick? Do you think that there's any way that the moves he was making and the things he was saying were done with an actual honest and genuine intent to succeed?
Sarah, I don't believe that. When you have somebody who's had the immense amount of success that Phil Jackson's had, who's won 11 titles, you want to show that you can win. That's the only reason you're there on top of getting paid. You want to prove that you can do this as well as anybody else. So I never bought that he was trying to really hurt himself and his team and his legacy by making the moves that he did. He just made the wrong moves. So you think he's just
out of it? You think he's just...
I mean, I think he just made move after move that wasn't right and made you shake your head. Going back to last summer with Joakim Noah, that contract is just awful. Going back to hiring Derek Fisher as a first-time head coach, that didn't work out. Forcing the team to still try to run the triangle, which by seemingly all accounts is an outdated offense that doesn't allow for younger players to have the most success that they would like. There are reasons that this didn't work, and a lot of it will always fall back on the decisions Phil Jackson has made. But not for 1 second do I believe that Phil wanted out so badly that he was making them on purpose to continue to lose this many games.
I can't decide what's worse, to be honest with you. I mean, I think it's terrible to trash a team on your way out and to be selfish enough to want out of a contract to the point where you sabotage. But at the same time, it's also terrible to imagine that this is who Phil Jackson is now. He feels like a guy that got left behind, whether that was him tweeting about, how's the three-point shooting approach going? Not great. And you're like, actually it is. The team's focusing on hitting from distance are having a great deal of success. Forcing the triangle, buying in on guys like Rose and Noah that are not worth the deals that they're giving them. It feels like the kind of guy who is stuck in stone, and the rest of the league is passing him by. And I'm surprised. I'm surprised, not because I don't think he maybe has the ego of a guy who can get stuck in his ways, but because it felt like the person who was able to mold, the Rodmans and the Kobes and the Jordans would not be the same guy who would hit a certain point and then just stop evolving.
Yeah, Sarah, one of the defining characteristics of Phil's tenure, both as a player and a coach in the NBA, was the ability to adapt, to fit all these different pieces and all this different talent, both in Chicago and in L.A., into championship caliber teams. He had a way to manage egos, and he had a way of building teams up so that they were at their best, unified together when it mattered most. As a front office executive, that just wasn't the case. These teams, when you watch the Knicks, it looks like they weren't sure what to do offensively, both in Fisher's tenure in the first year of Jeff Hornacek, and even more, everybody just seemed unhappy. You listen to Carmelo Anthony, he seems unhappy. with the direction that things have gone. Porzingis in the last few weeks, he skipped that exit interview with Phil Jackson. He seems very unhappy. Like all this time, you're thinking that Phil would set a direction that everybody else would follow, and it seems like as the years have gone on in these 3 years, Phil just hasn't been able to put the pieces together to make it work, and he's completely lost trust not only within the organization, but within a fan base that used to love him as a former player.
It's Nick Friedel and Sarah Spain filling in for Bomani on the right time. We're brought to you by Pennzoil Synthetics, taking synthetic motor oil performance to a whole new level. Make the switch to Pennzoil Synthetics today. As I mentioned, there was that stat from ESPN Stats and Info that over the last 3 years, the Knicks won 29 and a half fewer games than expected compared to Vegas preseason over-unders. So giant underachievers. Even when the decisions he made for the roster weren't good, that roster that he compiled was still expected to do much better than it did. So it wasn't just, it wasn't the roster, it was also hiring Derek Fisher, and the Derek Fisher tenure was terrible beyond just the Matt Barnes stuff. He just didn't really seem ready to be an NBA coach. They were 40 and 96 with Fisher there. He goes out and gets a bunch of old dudes. He traded J.R. Smith and Iman Shumpert to the Cavs for basically nothing, traded away Tyson Chandler for nothing. It was move after move that just didn't pan out. And, as I said before, I'm interested in what goes on in a guy within him as a person that can allow him to so precipitously fall from someone that we all respected. And I think a lot of people will say, successes and failures as a GM won't really affect how we feel about him as a coach. I think it's almost impossible. He's not only someone who didn't succeed, he's become a laughingstock.
No doubt. No doubt. The whole image and aura of Phil Jackson, Sarah, prior to this job was that Phil was a winner. Phil won as a player. Phil won in a major way as a coach. And you're right. When you take the type of spins that he took and you make all these bad decisions, it all adds up. And I think the other thing that this marks is that there are no longer times when you can hire a name brand and just expect all the problems to go away, like Dolan did here in New York. He hired Phil Jackson because Phil has won 11 different rings, and Phil has had success in molding clubs together. But when you have that kind of precipitous fall, this is the issue. You tell me, how many people walking down the street in Manhattan would be able to name R.C. Buford, who know who he is? It wouldn't happen. There just aren't that many people. But this guy repeatedly has put in place what he needed to have success in San Antonio. Now Phil Jackson comes into New York, and everybody was expecting everything to work out, and it's worked out so poorly and on such a grand scale that you hope, if you're a Knicks fan, that Dolan has finally learned from a mistake here, Sarah, and he just goes out and hires the best person for the job, not necessarily the best name.
Well, the parting gift for the Knicks that he has left is that new draft pick, whose name I cannot pronounce, Frank Ntilikina?
The N-Man.
Frank N. Drafted eighth overall by the Knicks just 6 days ago, injured his knee during practice. He was walking gingerly, had it taped up. We don't know yet how serious it is. This is coming out of the New York Daily News. It may be just a very mild thing, but it feels like for that to happen on the very day that they let go of Phil Jackson, that he's left a little parting gift in the form of a potentially injured young draft pick. Also worth noting, Nick, how this might affect the Carmelo Anthony situation. We have heard for a full season now that Carmelo Anthony wants to stay in New York. Phil Jackson is pressuring him to leave, both passive-aggressively, and then at the end they're just aggressively and openly and publicly asking him to leave. Now that he's gone, we had heard that Carmelo was finally starting to change his mind. All right, now maybe I'd be interested in a buyout. I'm not going to dig my heels into New York. I'll take a buyout. Well, you think James Dolan now is going to be, to acquiesce to his demands and say, all right, well, fine, we'll give you this big, huge chunk of money to leave, the same way that Phil Jackson might have.
Yeah, how much money is James Dolan willing to eat, Sarah?
Today, in the next week.
That's what it boils down to. How many different times is this guy going to write another huge check to make a problem disappear? I mean, in all honesty, if you're the Knicks, that's probably the way to go to wipe the slate completely clean. But this is why the Knicks continue to have so many different problems, because it starts from ownership on the way down. When you make this many bad deals, both with your star player in allowing him the no-trade clause and giving him all the money, and then with bringing in the guy who's running your organization, who has never had experience in a front office role before, but you love him because of his name and his previous success as a coach. When it all breaks down, that's where you look. You look at ownership. You look at why this continues to happen. And that's why fans in New York are so angry. They're always upset at Dolan. They have every right to be.
I would be angry, but at this point I'd also be basically despondent because, you know, it may feel like a time for celebration that Phil Jackson is gone. But that also means that now you're left with James Dolan at the helm again and wondering how long until things get fixed. Steve Mills, the Knicks general manager, is going to stay in his current role. He's going to kind of be in charge during free agency. But you're right. It feels like until they, you know, get rid of Dolan or until he finds a different person who knows what they're doing and then does the hands-off approach, things aren't going to get much better for them. It's just going to be a different way to watch them fail.
Yeah,
Sorry. I don't mean to be so negative, but it just feels sort of like a lost cause out there.
They've lost the benefit of the doubt, Sarah. And in pro sports, when you do that for paying customers, no matter how loyal they might have been over the years, when you have lost that, I don't think there's any coming back from that. So now here we go again with the Knicks starting over. But there's a reason they're always a train wreck, and the reason starts with Dolan and has continued to rear its ugly face time and time again.
Yes, that reason was playing a live show with his band during draft night. Coming up next, we'll talk to Mike Wise about the Knicks and everything else going on in the NBA next on The Right Time on ESPN Radio. But now we got more to say, because even though we had you on Izzy in Spain last night, a whole bunch of news has changed the dynamics of the NBA. And let's start in New York, because I know you've been focused on Phil Jackson and exactly what was going on with his tenure in the Big Apple. And now it's over. I'm trying to be hopeful on behalf of Knicks fans because he's out of there. But I feel like the head of the snake is still there. And as long as James Dolan is there, I'm having trouble thinking of optimistic thoughts for their future.
The head of the snake is right, Sarah. This is probably too much information for you, Nick, but at one point in my life, before I met a woman and that I really made an effort to be in a relationship with, I was in all these other bad relationships that I would tell my friends about, like, yeah, she's this, she's that. And one day my friend went up to me and said, "Hey, dummy, you know who the common denominator in all these relationships is?" Well, guess what? Jim Dolan is the common denominator in every.
It was James Dolan. You kept trying to have a threesome with James Dolan, and it was always him.
Yeah, it was always him, and it was like if Jim Dolan, if he sold the team, I'm convinced that Phil Jackson would have gone down as the greatest executive in the history of time. But I'm not going to put it all on him. Phil, somehow, I don't know. The weirdest thing is, I can't fathom, because I was in the locker room after he won his 10th title and his family was around him, and I'm thinking, man, I'm in a moment here with a guy who's got the palm of the world in his hands. He just won more championships than the great late Red Auerbach, and now it's sort of like he's in this league he doesn't recognize. Like, these players are forming teams on their own, and he can't do the tough love thing like he used to do with Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant and even Michael and Scotty. He essentially has to be this guy that sits back and watches things that happen to him. And it's just, this guy was a star whisperer, Sarah, and now I don't know what he is. I mean, it's a shocker on many levels.
So, Mike, with that in mind, while we're on the topic of Phil, how much do you think that his time as the head of the Knicks in the last few years has dented his legacy?
I mean, right now it looks awful, and it's. I think if you're a old-time Knicks fan or you're one of those kids whose parents told you about Action Jackson and how Phil was this great, a role player and cult hero on those 70s teams, and now he's the guy who's come back to save your franchise. I think there's always going to be that reservoir of goodwill in New York is gone, and if it's not gone, it's very low. But I think if you look, like when the caravan passes of this week and we get through a couple seasons and Phil Jackson is either retired and happy and driving a motorcycle around Thailand or he's recommending books to another player and burning sage, I think that Phil Jackson will go down as the greatest coach in league history that just never made the jump to an executive. And he'll be in a place, Nick, where people will say, well, like Dan Snyder in Washington with the football team, the same thing. Every coach that goes here, Mike Shanahan looked awful, but people will say in a couple of years, oh, well, he worked for Dan Snyder. What did you expect? And I think he'll always have that as a caveat, sort of. So I think all, it's not going to jeopardize the fact that he's already in the Hall of Fame. I just think that it's just too bad. It's like seeing your cool uncle get too old and all of a sudden he can't hear you anymore. That's what Phil was to me. He just the game, the not the game passed him by, but the actual machinations and the way players had control over their careers like they never had before. I think that sort of flustered him in ways that he'll never really admit.
Yeah, and maybe you're right. Maybe we are a bit prisoners of the moment in thinking that it's forever tarnished. Maybe after a little bit of room to breathe, we'll be able to step away from this recent precipitous fall and reflect back on all the other stuff. Talking to Mike Wise, ESPN senior writer at The Undefeated. What do you think happens next with Carmelo? He's been digging his heels and saying he wants to stay in New York. Phil was trying to push him out. Now he's pivoted to, all right, let's talk buyout. But Phil's not there anymore. The guy who wanted you out so badly is gone. Do you think that there's a chance Dolan will work with him on getting out of there?
I don't know. Yeah, I think it depends on what Carmelo's going to give him back money-wise. And I also think, if you're the franchise and you're Steve Mills, who's, I guess, in charge now, you have to ask yourself, well, how far is this going to go? Like, how far is Carmelo going to take days off? Is he just going to be one of these sour guys that just wants to get out of here and he's going to play himself out of here by not playing? Then you start to have those discussions. At some point, I think if an employee doesn't want to be there, you find a way to move them on that's not crazy financial suicide for you. And so does Carmelo move on this year? I don't know. I still think that they try and put one more person in place, and they try and get one more year out of him. But also, man, there's so much going on. I mean, this Chris Paul thing. Chris Paul essentially orchestrated that trade, and he basically went into the Rockets went into the Clippers and said, "Hey, you guys can lose me for nothing in 48 hours, or you can get something for me because this is where I want to go." And so, props to him for telling Doc Rivers that, because at least they got something. But Doc Rivers is probably thinking, "Wait a minute, you're my employee. I'm the team president." And you know what? We don't live in that world anymore. And so that being said, I wouldn't be surprised if Carmelo ended up with another team. I mean, I talked to Doc a few nights ago, and most of it was off the record. But I remember one thing he said to me was he was really worried about the whole super team thing, like where players if you were an all-star, perennial all-star now, you were in your head, you were thinking, wait a minute, I got to go build my team. What am I thinking? And clearly that's happening.
Mike, to that point, do you think it's bad for the league, as somebody who's covered the league for as long as you have, that all these stars are pairing up, and then you start seasons with only a few teams that have the ability to potentially win a title?
Well, they always, believe it or not, the NBA always operated on that premise, even during the Lakers-Celtics days. But at least then, like, if you were the Lakers and Celtics, you had, like, on the Celtics side in the Eastern Conference, you had the Pistons, and you had the Sixers, and then the Bulls. And you always had somebody to fight you on your way to the title or to the finals. And the same with the Lakers. They had the Blazers, they had the Mavericks for years, who were probably one of the great teams to never make the finals, like Derek Harper and all those great Maverick teams. But it's like nowadays, like, you could have went into this season and said, there are two teams that are going to end up in the finals, and I know what they are already. If you don't get at least 4 to 5 teams that have the potential to win it all, then you run the risk as a league of alienating a lot of your fan base to the point where it's great to have a villain team. It's great to have a team that everybody considers the Beatles and they all want to, gawk at, and you want to put your marketing plan around if you're a sad team. But look, you can't just have the Warriors and the Cavaliers meeting for 5 years in a row. It's a great 30 for 30 in 20 years, but it also makes Milwaukee, Washington, and Portland and everywhere else look at each other and go, what were we even doing? Like, what kind of league was that?
Yeah, it's like you said, I don't think necessarily the game entirely passed by, Phil, but as we're seeing all of these power structures change, it will be interesting to see who reacts the fastest and which teams are able to best counteract players having a lot more power than they used to. Thanks so much for making time for us, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Guys, have a great rest of the day and rest of the week.
Okay, Kevin, for the grand prize of $1 million. What color is the White House?
I know this.
5 seconds.
Oh, switching to Geico could save you a bunch of money on car insurance?
Okay. Judges? That's true, Kevin. They'll allow it. Congratulations. You're a winner.
Woo!
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
Back to the right time on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. Bomani is out today. Sarah Spain and Nick Friedel filling in. ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance. Pick from a range of coverage options with the Name Your Price tool to find a price that works for you. Nick, I'm just going to call this segment the Get Off My Lawn segment. I'm feeling old today. We talked the other day about young upstart Cody Bellinger not knowing who Seinfeld is. That made me feel old. And then I'm seeing in our industry, in our sports industry across a lot of websites, including Fox Sports Net or Fox Sports 1 and MTV News today, announcing a bunch of cuts as well. That a lot of places are going for the video over the writing, and they're trying to emphasize video to the point of laying off almost their entire writing staff. And I don't know if you're like me, but I would much rather read a story than watch a video. Much rather.
Absolutely. That's the way I grew up reading stories. I'm not to a point, and I don't think I ever will be, where I only want video content of anything.
Well, it's frustrating because actually Nate Silver from 538 just tweeted out, has there been a company that's pivoted to video entirely and shown an increase in profit? I guess what we'll have to see is whether this decision actually responds the way that these places want. Is it going to result in actual profit driving, or is it just a last ditch effort or a pivot that you feel like you need to do something? And I don't necessarily blame the places doing it so much as I'm frustrated with the audience, right? That people are wanting everything in emoji and GIF and video form instead of wanting to read.
Everything is for shorter and smaller consumption. Right.
Very, very short time attention spans, which is understandable. There's so much around. There's so much to digest. You can get news from a million different places, but that doesn't necessarily take away from the benefit and the depth and importance of real reporting and well-written stuff. That just doesn't come across the same way in a 2-minute video. But yeah, I realize that we sound old saying that, and that there's a lot of youngsters who would rather get all their content via video. So hopefully all of those good folks at those places will find new jobs soon. You hate to see that, especially in favor of videos, in my opinion. But times they are changing. We can't Phil Jackson it, right, Nick? We gotta stay on top of things. We gotta Snapchat and learn this Marco Polo thing everybody's doing now. We gotta jump on board with that.
I don't even know what you're talking about, but as far as Phil Jackson, if Phil Jackson and it goes, if somebody wants to write me a check for a few mega millions,
$50,000 a day,
yeah, then I'm on board for that. I'm going straight to San Diego and buy my beach house.
There you go. All you ask is $50,000 a day to completely tank a franchise. Wow, it's very generous of you.
I mean,
demands.
I'm a people pleaser, Sarah.
Yeah. The other thing that had me thinking that I'm, feeling a little get off my lawn today is Darren Ravel reporting the renovations for the Hawks' new Phillips Arena. Now, keep in mind, this arena is a $192.5 million renovation. The Atlanta City Council approved the funding, and according to the Associated Press, the Hawks are giving $50 million. The city's sale of Turner Field to Georgia State University is amounting to $32.5 million, and then $110 million of it will come from car rental tax at the Atlanta airport. So to all the writers that are still writers being sent to Atlanta to cover the Hawks, your car rental tax just went way up because now you are paying for a barber shop, 2 top flight simulator swing suites, and a bar courtside with a view of the court on the same level, right behind the bucket. I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, Nick, but this seems unnecessary to me. Just go watch the basketball game.
This is what it takes, though, to spend that entertainment dollar. I was cracked up because when you teased the segment, Sarah, I grew up in Orlando, Florida, and a buddy of mine, before you had mentioned the Hawks, said... I said,
are you thinking to yourself, I like going to NBA games, but I'm not close enough or drunk enough?
Right.
And I've got the answer for you.
Right. And he said, nobody's drunk enough to watch the Magic right now. So in that realm, if you're a Hawks fan, yeah, the team, it's had some nice years in the last few seasons, but it's on a downswing right now. If the whole goal is to get fans in there and to entertain them, I'm all about trying something different, but I can tell you, having gone to all these different arenas and all my time covering the league, the thing that has always driven me nuts, as somebody who has grown up as a basketball fan my whole life, is all these arenas where you're taking fans out of their seats and they're not really watching the game. Right. And I feel like this is another example of that. You've got a courtside bar, which will certainly be, you would think, very cool to hang out in, but who's going to watch the game? You're just more there for the event, and you're going to take fans' interest level, I would think, and their focus a long way away from the floor where it should be.
Yeah, the bar doesn't bother me as much because I know, the Blackhawks and some of the arenas have bars that are kind of, they open out and on an upper level, so you can kind of get your drink and hang out and watch. But this one is courtside. And I think people will still, be keeping their eye on it while they're mingling and sipping. But to me, it's like, why do you need to get a haircut at an NBA game? And the barber shop has a view of the court. Why do you need to have Top Golf? It's funny to me that for so long we talked about how baseball was going to phase out because people just don't have the attention span to watch a slower game that develops over time, that has these big gaps in between pitches and stuff. If the NBA isn't exciting enough for you and fast-paced enough for you, I'm not sure what will be. And like I said, I don't want to be the get-off-my-lawn person. It just seems to me that if you go to an NBA game, it should be enough that you have the basketball and the big screen playing music and live performances and dancers and food and contests and T-shirt cannons. I mean, it feels like Idiocracy, where we have to constantly, every second, there needs to be some sort of appeal to our senses.
Yeah, but think about the new pickup lines that have come out of this, Sarah. Hey, baby, you want to go with me and go check out some Top Golf at the basketball game?
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
while I get a haircut, and then let's get a drink.
We can hit the courtside club and go hang out and check out what's going on. I mean, hey,
man,
whatever
old. Get
people in the building.
Back in my day, I could just sit and watch a basketball game.
get a beer and some popcorn. I mean,
exactly. No, now you need sushi and a taco that's half hot dog and half hamburger in a taco. Now I really sound old. All right, I mentioned baseball. We're going to get to the absolute worst time, if you are a baseball player, to do something remotely controversial when no one has anything else to talk about. What's next on The Right Time? Back to The Right Time on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app, presented by Progressive Insurance. Guest appear via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Tweet us on the 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed, at Sarah Spain, at Nick Friedel. We were talking last night about something that the Levitard guys coined called getting Juned, which is what happened to John McEnroe and his comments about Serena Williams. They weren't that offensive or bothersome. People had thoughts on that issue, and they used that particular news peg as an entry point to get into a larger discussion about, using male accomplishments to downgrade or as a lens through which to view women's accomplishments. But we said he got Juned. Like, it wouldn't have been on every single show, every single second, if there was a whole lot of other stuff going on. And unfortunately for the Cubs' former catcher, Miguel Montero, he got Juned. The big, no real big baseball story out. A lot of this NBA news came out today, so that helped him a bit. But last night, after their loss, he publicly called out Jake Arrieta for the 7 stolen bases that the Nationals acquired in a 6-1 win. And Montero is 1 for 32 this season, throwing out would-be Steelers, said that it was Arrieta's fault. It really sucked because the stolen bases go on me, but when you really look at it, the pitcher doesn't give me any time. Of course, if you look at the statistics, Montero is the consistent problem. Wilson Contreras has much better stats trying to throw out would-be Steelers, including when Lester's on the mound, a guy who literally has the yips and can't throw to first, doesn't hold guys. So even if there was a part of it that was Arrieta's fault, Nick, obviously not the right move to publicly call out a teammate, and the Cubs made quick work of him, DFAing him today and going to a call-up. And this is what Miguel had to say on ESPN 1000's Carmen and Yurko show today about how it all went down.
Well, they called me this morning, and they told me that they were going to let me go, and I agree with them. I mean, all I have to say is thanks to them, and they were great to me. The fans were great to me, and, too bad that it had to end up this way, because I love all my teammates, and they know that.
And, Nick, this isn't the first time that he's gotten on the wrong side of the management speaking out of turn.
No, it's not, Sarah. Right after the Cubs won the World Series, the day of the parade, in fact, Montero went on ESPN 1000, and in what was supposed to be a celebration of what had occurred in the last couple of days, Montero decides to air out the fact that he's really not that happy with the way everything played out because he wasn't given as much of a chance to play because down the stretch of the season, he really slumped, and the Cubs went with Wilson Contreras, their young rookie catcher. So I think for Montero moving forward, he learned a really tough lesson today, and that's this. And this is not just in sports, but all throughout life. Sometimes you can be too honest. And Montero is a guy that I know the media loves for that honesty. I think his teammates, when you listen to their accounts, they kind of shake their heads sometimes, but I think he's garnered respect in that clubhouse for a couple seasons. But sometimes there are just things that are better left unsaid that you should hold on to. And in this case, as Montero is DFA'd now and looking for work somewhere else, he's got to remember that sometimes, especially to the media, you should just learn to keep your mouth shut and keep your thoughts more to yourself.
Right, and listen, I agree with your point that there's some things better left unsaid, but I don't know if I necessarily agree with the idea of being too honest. Yeah, Jake is certainly a part of the problem, but as I said, the statistics reveal that he's trying to pawn his own problem off on others. This is a constant issue for him, regardless of who's on the mound. So right. It's not as if he was saying something truthful that he shouldn't have said. It was a half-truth that he shouldn't have said. And it was a team that's already struggling. They're suffering from this World Series hangover. They're well underperforming what's expected of them. And the pitching staff is having a ton of issues, not just relating to base runners, but everything else. And it's just to go publicly and throw another guy under the bus, nothing to be gained there, especially when you've got a reserve, you've got a guy in AAA who's slashing 343, 384, 539, and you're a replacement level player. That's right. Not the time to speak up.
No, and Sarah, I think this has been a long time coming because fans were waiting for something else to happen after Montero's comments following the World Series. Now that it has, you're going to find out just how tough and together that Cubs clubhouse is, and it seems right now that there are some issues in finding that one leader that everybody rallies around.
Right, it should be Rizzo. Rizzo kind of called out Montero today for his comments, but Montero did say on his way out, nothing wrong with the clubhouse. It should be fine. We'll see. The Right Time is brought to you by Firestone Complete Auto Care, keeping cars running newer, longer, whatever you drive a Firestone. More with Nick Friedel and Sarah Spain coming up next on The Right Time.